When I walked into my only daughter's wedding reception, her new mother-in-law leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Poor Rebecca. She looks like the grandmother, not the mother of the bride." The words sliced through me like a serrated knife, shredding something vital inside my chest. Grandmother, not mother. I froze mid-step, my champagne flute trembling in my hand, my carefully applied lipstick suddenly feeling like a child's crayon scribble across my face. The crystal chandelier lights above seemed too dim, focusing their merciless beams directly on every line around my eyes, every silver strand I'd missed coloring at my temples. My daughter Melissa looked breathtaking across the room in her ivory gown, her 27-year-old skin glowing with youth and joy. Next to her, I was a fading photograph, a woman of 52 whose appearance apparently deserved hushed, pitying comments. Grandmother, not mother. The phrase echoed in my mind as I forced my feet to keep moving, to not cause a scene. This was Melissa's day, not the time for her mother's wounded vanity. I'd spent $3,450 on my mother of a bride dress-up, dusty blue silk that the boutique owner had assured me was age-appropriate yet elegant. I'd invested another $650 on professional makeup and hair, determined to look my absolute best. I'd even started a facial regimen costing $217 per month 6 months before the wedding. And yet, those 4 cruel words had rendered every effort meaningless. The worst part wasn't even the comment itself. It was that some deep, insecure part of me wasn't surprised. At 52, I'd already started to notice how store clerks' eyes slid past me to younger customers, how men who once would have held doors now let them swing shut in my face, how my opinions in meetings at the publishing house, where I'd worked for 23 years, carried less weight than when I was 35. Invisible. I was becoming invisible. "Rebecca, there you are." My sister Caroline appeared at my elbow, 48, and still turning heads. In her fitted burgundy dress, she'd been blessed with our mother's high cheekbones and naturally thick hair. "You look a million miles away. Everything okay?" "Of course," I lied, downing half my champagne in one swallow. The bubbles burned my throat, a welcome distraction from the burning behind my eyes. Just taking it all in. My baby girl, married. Caroline squeezed my arm. "You did good, sis. This wedding is gorgeous, and Melissa is radiant." She lowered her voice. "Though between you and me, I'm not sold on the groom's family. His mother has been micromanaging the catering staff since she arrived." Ah yes, Martha Winters. My new nemesis, apparently, the woman who'd just reduced my existence to a punchline about my advanced age. She stood across the reception hall, a willowy 56-year-old, with suspiciously few wrinkles and expensively highlighted blonde hair. Next to her steel-haired husband, she looked nearly a decade younger than her actual age and, certainly younger than I apparently looked. "I think Martha's just particular," I said, my Midwestern politeness kicking in reflexively. She wanted everything perfect for Tyler. Well, she could stand to be a little less particular and a little more gracious, Caroline muttered. "Anyway, Mom's looking for you. She wants a family photo before the first dance." Our mother, Eleanor, at 76, still stood straight as a ballerina, her white hair styled in a perfect bob. She'd been widowed for 15 years, but wore it like a badge of strength rather than sorrow. As I approached her, I wondered if I'd inherited any of her dignity, her quiet confidence that seemed impervious to society's judgments. "There's my beautiful daughter," she said, pulling me into a lavender-scented hug. "I've been showing off your wedding planning skills to everyone. The flowers are exactly right, not too showy, just elegant." I smiled against her shoulder, grateful for her warmth. "Thanks, Mom, though Melissa made most of the decisions. I just wrote the checks." "Nonsense. That girl has your taste, which means you raised her right." Eleanor held me at arm's length, examining my face with eyes that missed nothing. "Something's bothering you. Tell me later." Before I could answer, the photographer corralled us for family portraits. I stood stiffly, painfully aware of my posture, the soft flesh under my chin, the contrast between Melissa's dewy complexion and my powder-set one. I'd been so careful with my smile in the mirror that morning not too wide, which emphasized my deepening nasolabial folds. Now I struggled to find any expression that felt natural. Mrs. Harrison, could you step a little closer to the bride? The photographer called. Great, and maybe lift your chin just a touch. Code for let me minimize your double chin, I thought bitterly, but complied. Next to me, Melissa reached for my hand and squeezed it. You looked beautiful, Mom, she whispered as the camera clicked. I'm so glad you're here. My throat tightened. My girl. My sweet, kind girl who'd somehow grown up without absorbing the world's cruel calculus of female worth. I squeezed back, blinking away the moisture in my eyes before it could ruin my carefully applied makeup. Wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart. After the photos, I made my way to the bar, suddenly desperate for something stronger than champagne. The bartender, a young man who couldn't be more than 25, barely glanced at me as I ordered a gin and tonic. 3 minutes later, when a group of Melissa's friends approached, he straightened up. His demeanor instantly more attentive, his smile broader. I took my drink and retreated to a high-top table near the edge of the dance floor. From this vantage point, I could observe the entire reception. My ex-husband, Daniel, now 54, danced with his 36-year-old girlfriend, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. They'd been together for 2 years, since approximately 5 minutes after our divorce was finalized. I'd caught him texting her 6 months before he finally moved out of our house in Evanston, the home where we'd raised our daughter for 18 years. It's not what you think, he'd insisted, though it had been exactly what I thought. Kimberly's just a colleague who's going through a rough time. The rough time, apparently, had been the absence of my husband in her bed. Watching them now, I felt a familiar hollowness, not jealousy that had faded with time, but a strange sense of erasure. Our 22-year marriage, the life we'd built, the memories we'd created, all had been replaced so easily. I was interchangeable, disposable, upgraded for a newer model like an outdated appliance. This seat taken, a deep voice broke through my thoughts. I looked up to see Tyler's Uncle Robert. I remembered from the rehearsal dinner gesturing to the empty chair beside me. He was about my age, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind horn-rimmed glasses. Please, I said, gesturing. It's all yours. Thanks. He settled his considerable frame onto the chair with a sigh of relief. Don't tell anyone, but I'm hiding from my sister. Martha's on a mission to introduce me to every single woman over 40 and under 60 at this reception. Despite myself, I smiled. The dreaded wedding matchmaking. I've been dodging my mother's attempts all evening. Robert Winters, he said, extending his hand. Uncle of the groom and reluctantly single literature professor at Northwestern, Rebecca Harrison, I replied, shaking his warm, dry palm. Mother of the bride, and also reluctantly single. I'm a senior editor at Lakeside Publishing. Lakeside, you didn't work on the Bennett biography last year, did you? I nodded, pleasantly surprised. I was the lead editor, actually. Brilliant work, he said, his eyes lighting up with genuine interest. I assigned it to my American literature seminar. The students couldn't stop talking about it. For the next 20 minutes, we discussed books, authors, and the publishing industry, the conversation flowing easily. Robert asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to my answers, treating my professional opinions with respect. After months of first dates where men either talked exclusively about themselves or explained my own industry to me, it was refreshing. Uncle Rob. Tyler appeared, clapping his uncle on the shoulder. Mom's looking everywhere for you. Aunt Susan just arrived, and he stopped, noticing me. Oh, Mrs. Harrison, sorry to interrupt. Not at all, I said, smiling at my new son-in-law, and please, call me Rebecca. Rebecca, he repeated with a warm smile. Melissa's looking for you too. I think they're about to cut the cake. As we made our way across the reception hall, I caught Martha's gaze following us, her expression unreadable. When we reached the cake table, Melissa grabbed my hand. There you are. I need you for this part. she said, pulling me close as the photographer positioned himself. The cake cutting passed in a blur of flashing cameras and cheers. Afterward, as guests returned to their tables for dessert, I found myself next to Martha at the coffee station. "Rebecca," she acknowledged with a tight smile, stirring artificial sweetener into her cup. "Lovely wedding. Melissa is a beautiful bride." "Thank you," I said, selecting a tea bag. "Tyler is a wonderful young man. You must be very proud." "Oh, I am." She glanced at me sidelong. "I couldn't help but notice you chatting with my brother. Robert's quite selective about his conversation partners." Something in her tone made my spine stiffen. "We discovered some common professional interests." Martha's laugh tinkled like ice in a glass. "How nice. Robert always did have a soft spot for ... mature women. Even in college, he was dating the teaching assistants while his friends chased freshmen." She patted my arm with cool fingers. "It's so refreshing, don't you think? Men who appreciate experience." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. I met her gaze directly. "I find intelligence attractive in any age package, Martha. Kindness too." I walked away before she could respond, my tea forgotten on the counter. My hands were trembling again, but this time from anger rather than hurt. The calculating look in Martha's eyes had been clear. She'd viewed my conversation with her brother as some sort of desperate grasp at male attention. As if at 52, any interaction with a man must be driven by loneliness or desperation. The evening wore on. I danced with my brother, with Melissa's godfather, even with Tyler, who twirled me around the dance floor with youthful enthusiasm. But as the crowd thinned and the music slowed, I found myself increasingly aware of the shifting social dynamics around me. The younger women, Melissa's college friends, the bridesmaids, even Daniel's girlfriend remained, surrounded by attention, their laughter drawing people into their orbits like planets around bright suns. Meanwhile, I noticed the women my age and older drifting toward the periphery. My mother sat with her sisters at a corner table. My college roommate Janet stood alone by the dessert table, watching the dancing with a wistful expression. Even Caroline, vibrant Caroline, had retreated to the bar with her husband rather than brave the dance floor again, after one young man had smiled too indulgently at her moves. By midnight, when Melissa and Tyler made their exit amid a shower of rose petals, I was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally drained from the constant awareness of my own visibility, or lack thereof. I hugged my daughter tightly, whispering congratulations and love into her ear, then watched as the newlyweds drove away toward their hotel and waiting honeymoon. "Need a ride to your hotel?" Caroline asked as the last guests dispersed. "Jim and I are heading that way." "Thanks, but I have my car," I said, gathering my clutch and shawl. "I'll see you at brunch tomorrow." The night air was cool against my face as I walked to the parking lot. My feet ached in the new shoes I'd bought specifically for this occasion, $275 designer heels that had seemed worth it when I was preparing for my daughter's wedding. Now they just felt like expensive instruments of torture. I slipped them off once I was in my car, flexing my toes in relief. In the rearview mirror, I caught sight of my reflection in the dim light. The careful makeup had held up well, but beneath it, I could see the truth that Martha had so casually pointed out. The years were there in the softening of my jawline, the fine lines around my eyes, the slight heaviness of my eyelids. Grandmother, not mother. Something hot and angry rose in my chest, surprising me with its intensity. I'd spent my entire adult life playing by the rules. I'd watched my weight, invested in skincare, dressed appropriately, laughed at the right times, never complained too loudly, and my reward was to be dismissed, categorized, and ultimately rendered invisible once I'd passed some arbitrary expiration date. I started the car with more force than necessary. As I pulled out of the parking lot, a memory surfaced: my mother on my own wedding day, 28 years earlier. She'd been 48 then, 4 years younger than I was now. Had I seen her as old? Had I unconsciously dismissed her viewpoints, her feelings, her worth because she was no longer young? The hotel was only 15 minutes from the reception venue, but by the time I reached it, my mind was racing. In my room, I kicked off those ridiculous heels and unzipped the age-appropriate dress, letting it puddle on the floor. I stood in my shapewear and stared at my reflection in the full-length mirror. For the first time in years, I really looked at myself. Not with the critical eye I usually turned on my flaws, but with curiosity. The body reflected back at me had carried and birthed a child, had healed from a C-section, had hiked mountains and swum oceans. My hands had edited thousands of manuscripts, typed millions of words, held my daughter through countless fevers and heartbreaks. My smile lines had been earned through decades of actual smiling. Yet society, and worse, I myself, had reduced all of that living to a single evaluation: still acceptable or no longer relevant. The epiphany didn't make me feel better. If anything, it amplified my anger. I was furious at Martha, at Daniel, at the youth-obsessed culture that had trained me to see myself through such a warped lens. But mostly, I was angry at myself for internalizing it all so completely. I wiped off my makeup with more aggression than necessary. The expensive cleansing balm from Sephora smearing my carefully applied eyeliner into raccoon circles. In the shower, I let the hot water sluice over me, washing away hairspray and perfume, and the lingering feeling of shame. Afterward, wrapped in the hotel's plush robe, I called my mother. It was late, after 1 a.m., but I knew she'd be awake. Eleanor had been an insomniac since my father died. "Rebecca, is everything all right?" Her voice was alert despite the hour. "I'm fine, Mom. Just ... processing. It was a beautiful wedding, wasn't it? Absolutely perfect. You did a wonderful job." She paused. "Now tell me what's bothering you. And don't say nothing. I've known you for 52 years. The tears I'd been holding back all day suddenly spilled over. When did I become old, Mom? When did I cross that line from being seen to being invisible?" There was a long silence on the other end, then a soft sigh. "Oh, sweetheart, something happened at the wedding, didn't it?" I told her about Martha's comment, about the bartender, about the whole day of subtle and not-so-subtle reminders that I'd somehow aged out of relevance. "I thought I was prepared for getting older," I said, my voice breaking. "I've been dyeing the gray since I was 40. I've got more anti-aging creams than I can count. But nothing prepared me for this erasure. Because no one talks about it honestly," my mother said quietly. "Women are supposed to fight aging with every weapon we have, but never acknowledge the battle. We're supposed to age gracefully, which really means don't let us see you struggle, and for God's sake, don't complain about how unfair it is." Her frankness startled a laugh out of me. "Mom, when did you get so radical?" "Around 65, she said with a chuckle. "That's when I finally stopped giving a damn what others thought. Should have done it decades earlier. So what do I do now? Just wait until I'm 65 to feel better about this?" "No, darling, you decide right now whether you're going to let people like Martha Winters define your worth. Because if you do, I guarantee you won't suddenly feel better at 65 or 75 or 95. The world doesn't suddenly start valuing older women. We have to value ourselves." I let her words sink in, feeling something shift inside me. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise," she retorted. "You just weren't old enough to notice." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, my mother's words echoing in my mind. Value ourselves. It sounded simple, but how did one unlearn a lifetime of cultural programming? How did I stop seeing myself through the diminishing lens that society had trained on women past their reproductive prime? I didn't have answers yet, but for the first time, I was asking the right questions, and somehow, that felt like the first step on a journey I hadn't even known I needed to take. As I finally slipped between the cool sheets, I made myself a promise. This wedding, this day of joy for my daughter but reckoning for me, would be a turning point. I didn't yet know what lay on the other side, but I knew I couldn't go back to the slow fate I'd been accepting. Grandmother, not mother. The words still stung, but now they also fueled something new. A determination, perhaps, or maybe just the first spark of a long overdue rebellion. The ceiling of the hotel room stared back at me blankly as the digital clock on the nightstand flipped to 2:17 a.m. In 9 hours, I would face Martha Winters again at the post-wedding brunch. The old Rebecca would smile politely, deflect any barbs with self-deprecating humor, and focus on making everyone else comfortable at the expense of her own dignity. But something told me that version of Rebecca Harrison might have checked out of this hotel room for good. The morning light filtered through the hotel curtains I'd forgotten to close completely, waking me at 6:38 a.m. My head throbbed with the dull ache of too little sleep and one too many glasses of wine. For a moment, I lay still, trying to recapture the determination I'd felt before falling asleep. In the harsh light of morning, last night's epiphany seemed melodramatic, fueled by wedding emotions and champagne. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and scrolled through the notifications. 3 texts from Caroline asking if I was okay after I'd left so abruptly. One from my mother with a simple heart emoji, and an email notification from work, my assistant, reminding me about the acquisition meeting on Monday morning. Real life, waiting to reclaim me. The post-wedding brunch wouldn't start until 10:30. I had nearly 4 hours to prepare myself to face Martha Winters again, to see my ex-husband and his girlfriend sharing breakfast pastries with my extended family, to maintain the pleasant, accommodating facade I'd perfected over decades, or I could choose not to. The thought arrived unexpectedly, like a door suddenly appearing in a familiar wall. I could skip the brunch entirely, make an excuse, avoid the whole uncomfortable performance. But that would mean missing precious hours with Melissa before she left for her honeymoon. And it would mean letting Martha win. No, I would go. But perhaps I didn't need to be the Rebecca everyone expected. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and padded to the bathroom. In the mirror, last night's hasty face washing had left traces of mascara beneath my eyes. My hair stuck out at odd angles, and the fine sleep creases on my cheek would take at least an hour to fade. 52 stared back at me unfiltered, unmasked. "Good morning, Rebecca," I said to my reflection, testing how it felt to face myself without immediately cataloging flaws. Strange, but not terrible. The shower helped clear my head. As I dressed in the cream silk blouse and tailored navy pants I'd packed for the brunch, I made a decision. No more apologizing subtly or otherwise for taking up space. No more self-deprecating comments about my appearance to preempt others' judgment. No more shrinking to make others comfortable. Just for today, I would experiment with being unapologetically present. The hotel restaurant had been reserved for the post-wedding brunch from 10:30 to 1 o'clock. I arrived at 10:27, my hair styled in loose waves, my makeup understated but precise. No beneath my outfit another small rebellion. "Rebecca, over here." Caroline waved from a table near the windows where she sat with our mother and a few cousins. I made my way over, accepting hugs and compliments on the wedding. "You look well rested," my mother said with a knowing look that told me she'd seen right through my earlier distress. "Sleep okay?" Eventually, I replied, helping myself to coffee from the carafe on the table. Once I sorted a few things out in my head, Caroline leaned in, like why Martha Winters is such a Caroline, our mother warned, though a smile played at the corners of her mouth. I was going to say challenge to connect with, Caroline finished innocently. I laughed, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. My sister had always been my fiercest defender, especially when I wouldn't stand up for myself. The brunch was set up as a buffet, with stations for omelets, waffles, pastries, and fruit. As I stood considering my options, I felt a presence at my elbow. "The smoked salmon looks excellent," Robert Winters said, reaching past me for a plate. "Though I'm partial to waffles myself." "Why choose?" I replied. "It's a celebration, after all." He grinned, the corners of his eyes crinkling behind his glasses. "A woman after my own heart. How are you this morning?" "Recovery mode from all that mother of the bride excitement." "Something like that," I said, selecting a croissant and some berries. Though I'm discovering that after the wedding brings its own kind of excitement. Ah yes, the now what phase. I remember it from when my daughter got married 3 years ago. Suddenly all that planning energy has nowhere to go. I looked at him with new interest. You have a daughter. And a son. He nodded. Both from my marriage that ended 8 years ago. Amicable enough, but not without its scars. There was something refreshing about his straightforward acknowledgement of pain without dwelling on it. Before I could respond, Martha appeared, inserting herself between us with practiced smoothness. Robert, there you are. Mom's looking for you. She turned to me with her perfect hostess smile. Rebecca, darling, I was just telling everyone what a beautiful job you did with the wedding. Such lovely, traditional touches. The way she emphasized traditional made it sound like a polite synonym for outdated. The old Rebecca would have smiled uncomfortably and thanked her for the backhanded compliment. Instead, I met her gaze directly. Thank you, Martha. Melissa wanted a wedding that honored family traditions while still feeling contemporary. I'm thrilled with how it turned out. Martha's smile flickered slightly at my failure to seem flustered. Yes, well, every generation has its own taste, doesn't it? Though I've always found there's something to be said for keeping up with the times. I find there's something to be said for knowing which trends are worth following and which are just noise, I replied pleasantly. Discernment comes with experience, after all. Robert made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh disguised as a cough. Martha's eyes narrowed fractionally before she patted her brother's arm. Don't forget about Mom, she reminded him before gliding away toward a table of her relatives. My apologies for my sister, Robert said once she was out of earshot. Martha has always been, let's call it, particular about maintaining her social position. No need to apologize for her, I said, surprising myself with my directness. We're all responsible for our own behavior, aren't we? He studied me with increased interest. Indeed we are. Though I find most people prefer to make excuses. We filled our plates and parted ways, Robert to see his mother and I to return to my family's table. As I walked across the restaurant, I caught sight of my reflection in the window back straight, head high, moving with purpose. It felt different than yesterday's careful, self-conscious navigation of the reception. The brunch progressed pleasantly enough. Melissa and Tyler made their rounds, stopping at each table to thank everyone for coming. When they reached us, Melissa slid into the chair beside me, glowing with newlywed happiness. Mom, everything was perfect yesterday, she said, squeezing my hand. I can't thank you enough. You deserve perfect, I told her, memorizing the joy on her face. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Are you okay? She asked more quietly. You seemed a little off toward the end of the reception. Of course she'd noticed. My perceptive girl never missed much. I'm fine. Just processing the big day. She studied me with eyes so like my own. It's weird, isn't it? Everything building up to this huge event, and then suddenly it's over. A bit like sending you to college. I agreed. Months of preparation, and then an empty house. You could get a dog, she suggested, only half joking, or redecorate, or start dating again. I felt a flash of irritation at the suggestion that I needed to fill a void. Or I could just enjoy my life as it is. Melissa blinked, surprised by my tone. I didn't mean I know you didn't, I said, softening. I'm just realizing I've spent too much time thinking about what I should do next, instead of appreciating what I already have. She smiled, relieved. That sounds healthy, actually, though if you did want to try dating again, Tyler's Uncle Robert was asking about you. I nearly choked on my coffee. He was what? Asking if you were seeing anyone? She said, her eyes twinkling. In that casual way people do when they're trying not to be obvious. Before I could process this information, Tyler appeared to claim his bride for more socializing. As they moved to the next table, I caught Martha watching our interaction, her expression calculating. The brunch continued. I chatted with relatives, complimented the hotel staff on the food, and even managed a civil conversation with my ex-husband while his girlfriend was in the restroom. Through it all, I maintained my experiment in unapologetic presence, speaking at normal volume rather than the modulated, non-intrusive tone I'd unconsciously adopted in recent years. Expressing opinions without couching them in self-deprecating qualifiers. Taking up my fair share of space in conversations without constantly yielding the floor. Small changes, but they felt seismic. "You seem different today," Caroline commented as we helped Melissa gather the wedding cards and gifts that had been brought to the brunch. "More like your old self." "My old self," I echoed, curious about her perception. "Yeah, before the divorce, when you didn't second-guess every word out of your mouth." She sealed a box with packing tape. "It's nice to see. I hadn't realized my post-divorce retreat had been so noticeable. I'm trying something new. Well, it's working. And FYI, Tyler's hot uncle hasn't stopped looking at you all morning." I glanced across the room where Robert was deep in conversation with his elderly mother, a tiny woman with a cloud of white hair and Martha's determined chin. "He's just being friendly." "Hung," Caroline said skeptically. "That's why he asked me if you were moving back to Evanston or staying in Chicago." "He did not." "Did too. When you were helping Melissa with the gifts, he was very casual about it, very professor-like. But trust me, the man is interested." I felt a ridiculous flutter in my stomach, like a teenager with a crush. "That's unexpected, is it?" Caroline raised an eyebrow. "You're brilliant, successful, and gorgeous. Why wouldn't he be interested?" My reflexive denial died on my lips. Part of being unapologetically present, I decided, was not reflexively rejecting compliments. "Thank you," I said simply. Caroline looked momentarily surprised, then smiled. "You're welcome. Now go talk to him before Martha drags him away again." I hesitated, then squared my shoulders. "Maybe I will." The opportunity came as the brunch was winding down. Robert stood alone by the coffee station, stirring cream into his cup. I approached under the pretense of refilling my own. "Survived another wedding event," I commented, reaching for the carafe. "Just the honeymoon send-off left. The final hurdle," he agreed with a smile. "Though I'll miss these forced social interactions. They've been unexpectedly pleasant. Even with your sister running interference." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "You noticed that, did you?" "It was subtle, but effective," I said, stirring my coffee. "She's very protective of you." "Martha's protective of her image of our family," he corrected. "I'm just a piece in that particular chess game." "And what piece would that be?" "Knight bishop, definitely a rook. Useful but limited to straightforward movements." His expression turned more serious. "I hope she hasn't made you uncomfortable. Martha can be judgmental about who her family associates with." I met his gaze directly. "Are you asking if I'm intimidated by your sister, Professor Winters?" "I suppose I am." "The answer is no," I said honestly. "Not anymore." Something shifted in his expression, interest, deepening into genuine admiration. "Good. Because I'd like to see you again, Rebecca." Outside of wedding obligations, the directness of his invitation startled me. "You would? Dinner, perhaps. Or coffee if that seems too presumptuous." "Dinner," I decided, surprising myself with my certainty. "I'd like that." We exchanged numbers, agreeing to talk during the week to set a date. As we parted, I caught sight of Martha watching us from across the room, her disapproval evident even at a distance. Rather than avoiding her gaze, I nodded slightly in acknowledgement, before turning away. The brunch ended with tearful goodbyes as Melissa and Tyler prepared to leave for their honeymoon in Greece. I held my daughter tightly, inhaling her familiar scent one last time before releasing her to her new life. "I love you, Mom," she whispered against my shoulder. "Thank you for everything." "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotion tightening my throat. "Have the most wonderful time." As I watched them drive away, Caroline appeared at my side. "You okay?" "Yes," I said, realizing it was true. "Different, but okay." "Different how?" I considered the question carefully. like I'm standing at a crossroads I didn't know was coming. She nodded as if this made perfect sense. Any idea which way you're heading? Not yet, I admitted. But I think I'm done letting other people draw my map. The hotel parking lot emptied gradually as family members and wedding guests departed. I hugged my mother and sister goodbye, promising to call them both during the week. As I drove back to my Chicago apartment, I felt both exhausted and strangely energized. The wedding weekend, with all its joy and pain, revelations and humiliations, had forced me to see myself through multiple lenses: as Melissa's mother, as an aging woman in a youth-obsessed culture, as Daniel's ex-wife, as a potential romantic interest to Robert, as an obstacle to Martha's social orchestrations. Some of those perspectives had been cruel, others kind, but none of them captured the complete truth of who I was at 52. That, I was beginning to realize, was something I would need to define for myself. My apartment welcomed me with its familiar silence. I dropped my overnight bag in the bedroom and kicked off my shoes, padding in stocking feet to the kitchen to make tea. The events of the past 36 hours swirled in my mind like leaves caught in an eddy. Martha's whispered comment, my mother's late-night wisdom, Robert's dinner invitation, Melissa's departure for her honeymoon, and beneath it all, the persistent question, who was I now that my primary identity as a mother had shifted? The kettle whistled, jolting me from my thoughts. As I poured steaming water over a tea bag, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman staring back at me looked tired but resolute, like someone on the verge of a decision. Well, Rebecca, I said aloud to my reflection, what happens next is up to you. Monday morning arrived with brutal efficiency. My 5:30 a.m. alarm jerked me from a dream where I'd been searching for Melissa in a maze of wedding dresses. For 23 years I'd maintained the same weekday routine: up before dawn, coffee while reviewing manuscripts, shower, dress, commute to Lakeside Publishing's offices in downtown Chicago. The predictability had been comforting during the turmoil of my divorce 2 years ago. Now it felt like a straitjacket. I sipped my coffee at the kitchen island, reviewing notes for the acquisition meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. Lakeside was considering a memoir by a former tech CEO, a man who'd made his fortune in the 90s and now fancied himself a philosopher. The manuscript was mediocre at best, but the marketing department was salivating over his name recognition and social media following. Under normal circumstances, I'd have prepared a diplomatic assessment that balanced literary criticism with commercial realities. This morning, staring at my laptop screen, I found myself typing more direct comments, derivative insights presented as revolutionary, and self-congratulatory tone undermines authentic moments. I paused, finger hovering over the delete key. This was not how senior editor Rebecca Harrison typically communicated with the acquisition committee. I was known for my tact, my ability to express reservations without ruffling feathers. But perhaps that Rebecca had stayed behind at the wedding, along with other outworn personas I'd maintained past their usefulness. I saved the document without softening my assessment and headed to the shower. My work wardrobe had evolved over decades into a uniform of sorts: tailored slacks or skirts in neutral colors, silk blouses, structured blazers, sensible heels, professional but not flashy, appropriate. Today, I reached past my usual navy and charcoal options to a crimson blazer I'd purchased 6 months ago but never worn. Too bright, I'd decided. Too attention-seeking for a woman my age. Paired with black trousers and a cream blouse, the effect was striking but still professional. I applied my makeup with more attention to my eyes than usual, using techniques I'd learned from a YouTube tutorial Melissa had sent me. Mom, you have gorgeous eyes, she'd texted along with the link. Stop downplaying them. The woman in the mirror looked more vibrant than usual, less apologetic. I nodded at my reflection, grabbed my leather tote, and headed for the door. The Chicago L train was crowded with Monday morning commuters, their faces buried in phones or staring vacantly ahead. I'd taken this same train at the same time for 15 years, often seeing the same faces day after day without ever exchanging more than a nod. Urban anonymity, both comforting and isolating. At my stop in the loop, I joined the river of pedestrians flowing toward office buildings. The October morning was crisp, the sky a clear blue above the skyscrapers. I felt curiously alert, noticing details I usually breezed past: the pattern of light on glass buildings, the varied expressions of people I passed, the melody of a street musician playing saxophone near the entrance to my building. "Morning, Miss Harrison," said the security guard at the lobby desk. Eddie had worked there for at least a decade, and we exchanged the same pleasantries every day. "Good morning, Eddie," I replied, then added impulsively, "That's a great tie." He looked startled, then pleased. "Thanks. My daughter gave it to me for my birthday." This tiny deviation from our script, actually seeing him as an individual with a life beyond our daily 30-second interaction, felt significant. Somehow, the elevator carried me to the 12th floor, where Lakeside occupied half the space. As I walked toward my office, I greeted colleagues with more presence than usual, making actual eye contact instead of the perfunctory acknowledgments I'd defaulted to in recent years. Rebecca, my assistant, Zoe, intercepted me before I reached my office door. At 28, she vibrated with the nervous energy of someone still proving herself. The acquisition meeting got moved up to 8:30. They're already in the conference room. And that agent for the celebrity cookbook called 3 times on Friday after you left. "Which celebrity?" I asked, continuing toward my office to drop off my coat and bag. "The one from that baking show, with the catchphrase about butter," Zoe followed, tapping on her tablet. "Also, your ex called. He said it's about some tax document, but he wouldn't tell me specifics." I absorbed this barrage of information while scanning the pile of manuscripts and correspondence on my desk. "Tell the agent I'll call back this afternoon, and email Daniel that I'll address whatever tax issue when I have time." I picked up my notes and a pen. Now let's go deal with our aspiring philosopher. The acquisition meeting was already underway when we entered the glass-walled conference room. 8 people sat around the polished table, including Julian Green, Lakeside's executive publisher, and Margot Winters, the head of marketing. I froze momentarily in the doorway. Winters, it couldn't be a coincidence, could it? I studied Margot's face, searching for resemblance to Martha or Robert. She was perhaps 40, with sharp features and the intense focus of someone who'd clawed her way up the corporate ladder. I'd worked with her for 3 years without making any personal connection. "Rebecca, glad you could join us," Julian said, his British accent making even this mild rebuke sound civilized. "We were just discussing projected sales figures for the Peterson memoir." "Sorry I'm late," I said, taking a seat across from Margot. "I was told the meeting was at 9. We moved it up," Margot said briskly. "I sent an email yesterday afternoon, on Sunday, when I'd been at the post-wedding brunch." I nodded without apology and opened my notebook. The discussion continued around the table: projected sales, marketing angles, production costs. I listened, watching the familiar dance of corporate politics. Julian clearly wanted the book, regardless of its quality. The younger editors deferred to his enthusiasm, offering supportive comments while avoiding any substantive literary assessment. "Rebecca, you've been unusually quiet," Julian finally said, turning his attention to me. "What's your take on Peterson's manuscript?" In the past, I would have measured my response carefully, preserving my reputation as a team player while subtly registering my reservations. But something about seeing Margot Winters at the Taboola Cosmic Joke after my weekend confrontation with her possible relative crystallized a new resolve. "I think it's mediocre," I said plainly. "Peterson has name recognition but not writing skill. His insights are recycled from better thinkers, his anecdotes are self-aggrandizing, and his advice is superficial at best." A silence fell over the conference room. Julian's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "That's rather blunt," he said finally. "It's honest," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "And it's my Professional assessment after 23 years as an editor. The quality of the writing is secondary to marketability. Margot countered, leaning forward. Peterson has 2.7 million Twitter followers and a podcast with massive download numbers. I'm aware of his platform, I said. But publishing a subpar book under our imprint dilutes our brand. If we're shifting to become a vanity press for celebrities, that's a strategic decision we should acknowledge explicitly. Julian coughed, clearly uncomfortable with this direct challenge. No one's suggesting we become a vanity press, Rebecca. We're discussing one potential acquisition, which will set precedent for future acquisitions. I pointed out, if platform trumps quality here, that becomes our new standard. The discussion grew heated, with marketing and publicity aligning against editorial. I held my ground calmly, neither raising my voice nor backing down. When Julian finally called for a vote, the room split. Predictably, business versus art, commerce versus craft. We'll revisit this next week, Julian decided, clearly annoyed that what he'd expected to be a rubber stamp approval had turned contentious. Rebecca, I'd like to see a more detailed analysis of your concerns, with specific examples. Margot, get me updated projections based on comparable titles that underperformed despite strong platforms. As the meeting dispersed, I gathered my notes, aware of the glances being exchanged around me. I'd broken an unwritten rule of corporate culture: don't create friction, especially not with the boss's pet projects. In the hallway, Zoe caught up with me, eyes wide. That was wow, she said as we walked back to my office. I've never heard anyone speak to Julian like that. Like what? I asked, genuinely curious about her perception. Like directly. Without all the usual corporate cushioning. She lowered her voice. Everyone's going to be talking about it. Let them talk, I said, surprising myself with how little I cared. The manuscript is substandard, and pretending otherwise doesn't serve our readers or our publishing house. Zoe studied me with newfound interest. Something's different about you today. I smiled. Good different or bad different? Good, she decided after a moment. Definitely good. Back in my office, I closed the door and took a deep breath. The confrontation had left me feeling oddly energized, rather than anxious. For years I'd played the corporate game skillfully, navigating politics and personalities with diplomatic precision. It had served me well professionally. I'd risen steadily through the ranks while more outspoken colleagues hit glass ceilings or were edged out entirely. But at what cost? How much of myself had I muted, filtered, or hidden to maintain that trajectory? My phone vibrated with a text message. Robert Winters, any chance you're free for dinner this Thursday? There's a new Moroccan place in Lincoln Park I've been wanting to try. I smiled at the screen, pleasantly surprised by his prompt follow-up. Thursday works. Send me the details and I'll meet you there. His response came quickly. I'll pick you up. Old-fashioned, I know, but I prefer conversation on the way to dinner rather than meeting like business associates. The suggestion would normally have made me hesitate, giving a near stranger my home address, surrendering control of the transportation, committing to a longer social engagement with no easy exit if things got awkward. Today, it felt refreshing in its straightforwardness. 7 o'clock, I suggested. Perfect, looking forward to it. I put down my phone, aware of the small smile lingering on my face. It had been nearly a year since I'd been on a proper data-forgettable dinner with a widowed accountant Caroline had introduced me to. Before that, a handful of tepid coffee meetings with men from a dating app Melissa had insisted I try. None had progressed to a second date. The intercom on my desk buzzed. Rebecca, Margot Winters is here to see you, Zoe announced, sounding uncertain. Send her in, I replied, straightening the items on my desk automatically. Margot entered with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Do you have a few minutes to talk about the Peterson situation? She asked, closing the door behind her without waiting for an invitation. Of course, I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Though I'm not likely to change my assessment. I'm not here to change your mind, she said, sitting down and crossing her legs sharply. I'm here to understand what's really going on. I raised an eyebrow. Meaning you've never been the one to rock the boat in acquisition meetings. For 3 years, I've watched you find diplomatic ways to express reservations without creating conflict. Today you practically declared war. She leaned forward slightly. So what changed? The directness of her question caught me off guard. I considered deflecting, then decided on honesty. I'm reassessing my professional priorities. Because I've realized that some of my carefully cultivated workplace habits aren't serving me or Lakeside as well as I thought. Margot studied me with narrowed eyes. This isn't about Peterson's manuscript at all, is it? The manuscript is genuinely subpar, I maintained. But you're right that my approach to the discussion represents a shift in my thinking. She nodded slowly, as if confirming a theory. Are you by any chance related to Martha Winters from Connecticut? Married to a hedge fund manager. Son just got married this weekend? The connection clicked into place. No, but I did meet her at my daughter's wedding. She's your ... double quotes aunt. Margot supplied. My father's sister. Small world, isn't it? Too small, apparently. Very. She mentioned meeting a publishing executive named Rebecca at Tyler's wedding. Said you were ... double quotes. She paused, choosing her words carefully. An interesting woman. I could imagine exactly how Martha had phrased it. With that same condescending tone she'd used at the brunch. I found your aunt equally interesting, I replied neutrally. Margot's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. Martha has strong opinions about how people should behave, especially women of a certain ... double quotes. She paused again. Professional standing. The careful phrasing told me Margot was well aware of her aunt's ageist attitudes, but was too politically savvy to acknowledge them directly. I decided to be more direct. Your aunt seemed concerned that I might be getting ideas above my station. Specifically, my age-appropriate station. Margot's professional mask slipped, revealing a flash of genuine embarrassment, perhaps, or recognition. Martha belongs to a generation with very defined ideas about what's appropriate at different life stages. And you? I asked, curious about where this conversation was heading. She considered the question. I believe in strategic authenticity. Being genuine enough to build trust, but controlled enough to achieve your goals. She uncrossed and recrossed her legs. You've always struck me as someone who understood that balance. I did, I acknowledged. I'm just questioning whether the cost of maintaining it has become too high. Something shifted in Margot's expression, a flicker of unexpected respect. That's brave. Potentially foolish, but brave. Time will tell which, I said with a small smile. She stood, smoothing her already immaculate skirt. About Peterson, I'll provide the detailed critique Julian requested, I assured her, with specific examples of the manuscript's weaknesses. Good, because while I still think his platform justifies the acquisition, I want to be prepared if you're right about the quality issues. She moved toward the door, then paused. By the way, are you having dinner with my Uncle Robert on Thursday? I blinked, taken aback by the abrupt change of subject. How did you? Martha called me last night, apoplectic that Robert was getting involved with a woman his own age, instead of the 30-something adjunct professor she's been trying to set him up with. Margot's expression was unreadable. She wanted me to talk some sense into him since we both work in publishing. I felt a surge of indignation on Robert's behalf and my own. And will you? I make it a policy never to interfere in my relatives' personal lives, Margot replied smoothly, especially when it would align me with Martha's particular worldview. With that cryptic statement, she left, closing the door quietly behind her. I sat at my desk, absorbing this new twist. Martha Winters was actively trying to prevent her brother from dating me, a woman she clearly deemed unsuitable due to age. And now her niece, my professional colleague, was aware of the situation. The corporate and personal were colliding in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Just 72 hours ago, I'd been focused solely on making sure my daughter's wedding went smoothly. Now I found myself challenging executive decisions at work and becoming entangled in the winter's family drama. My phone buzzed with another text. Not Robert this time, but my daughter. Made it to Santorini. The view is insane. Miss you already, but having the best time. XOXO attached was a photo of Melissa and Tyler on a white terrace overlooking the impossibly blue Aegean Sea, their faces glowing with honeymoon happiness. I smiled at the image, feeling a complex mix of emotions: joy for my daughter, a tinge of wistfulness for my own long-ago honeymoon, and a new, unfamiliar sense of liberation. With Melissa embarking on her married life and my professional identity in flux, I stood at a crossroads I hadn't anticipated. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but for the first time in years, the uncertainty felt more exhilarating than frightening. By Thursday evening, news of my confrontation with Julian had spread throughout Lakeside Publishing. Colleagues I barely knew stopped by my office with transparent excuses, clearly hoping to witness some evidence of my apparent transformation. Others avoided me entirely, as if nonconformity might be contagious. My team of junior editors watched me with a mixture of concern and newfound respect, unsure whether to be inspired or alarmed by my willingness to challenge the executive publisher. I found their reactions more amusing than troubling. For 23 years, I'd built a reputation as a skilled but accommodating team player. 3 days of more authentic behavior had everyone buzzing as if I'd shown up to work in a clown costume. At 6:15, I left the office to head home before my dinner with Robert. The weather had turned, with a biting wind whipping between the skyscrapers and dark clouds threatening rain. Inside my apartment, I shed my work clothes and stood before my closet, considering options for the evening. The old Rebecca would have chosen something understated: a black dress. Perhaps, with modest heels and minimal jewelry, safe, appropriate, forgettable. Instead, I pulled out an emerald green wrap dress I'd purchased months ago but never worn. The color was vibrant against my skin, and the cut flattered my figure without trying to disguise my age. I paired it with black boots and a simple gold necklace Melissa had given me for my 50th birthday. As I applied my makeup, my phone rang with my mother's ringtone. "Just checking in," Eleanor said when I answered. "How are you holding up post-waiting?" "I'm good, actually," I replied, switching to speaker so I could finish my eyeliner. "Better than expected. You sound different," she observed. More, present. I smiled at her perception. "That's exactly what I've been working on." "Ah," she said, understanding immediately. "And how's that going?" "It's causing quite a stir at work. Apparently, having opinions is revolutionary for women over 50. Her laugh was warm and knowing. "Welcome to the revolution, darling. Your father always said you were the quiet rebel in the family." Seems he was right. We chatted for a few more minutes about Melissa's honeymoon photos and my mother's book club drama. I didn't mention the dinner with Robert, not ready to field questions about a relationship that might not go anywhere. "I should go," I said eventually. "I have plans tonight." "Good for you," Eleanor replied, with a hint of curiosity she didn't press. "Have fun. And Rebecca, I'm proud of you." The simple affirmation warmed me as I finished getting ready. At precisely 7 o'clock, my building's doorman called to announce Robert's arrival. I grabbed my coat and bag, feeling a flutter of anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. Robert stood in the lobby, wearing a charcoal blazer over a blue shirt, his glasses and slightly rumpled appearance giving him the quintessential professor look. When he saw me, his face lit with genuine pleasure. "Rebecca," he said, stepping forward to greet me. "You look wonderful." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the compliment without deflection. "So do you." Outside, fat raindrops had begun to fall, pattering against the sidewalk. Robert opened a large black umbrella, holding it over both of us as we walked to his car parked at the curb, a sensible Volvo sedan that somehow perfectly matched my mental image of what a literature professor would drive. "I hope you like Moroccan food," he said as he navigated through the rain-slicked streets. "This restaurant just opened last month, but the chef trained in Marrakesh. I love it, I assured him. And I appreciate adventure in dining. So many restaurants play it safe these days. He glanced at me with interest. I get the sense you're not a big fan of playing it safe in general. I used to be, I admitted. But I'm reconsidering that approach. Any particular reason? I considered how much to reveal. Let's just say, I recently realized the costs of caution can be higher than the risks of authenticity. Robert nodded slowly. That sounds like a story worth hearing over dinner. The restaurant was tucked into a renovated brownstone in Lincoln Park. Its interior warm with amber lighting, intricate tilework, and the aromas of exotic spices. The hostess led us to a corner table partially screened by Moroccan-style latticed panels, creating an intimate space without complete isolation from the lively atmosphere. "This is beautiful," I said, taking in the details: hammered metal lanterns casting patterned shadows, jewel-toned cushions on the banquette, the soft background of oud music. "I thought you might appreciate it," Robert replied, settling across from me. "It's authentic without being touristy." A waiter appeared with menus and described the evening's specials with poetic enthusiasm. We ordered a bottle of wine and several small plates to share: spiced olives, zolauk, pastilla, and lamb tijan. "So," Robert said once our wine had been poured and the waiter had departed, "shall we address the elephant in the room?" I raised an eyebrow, curious. Which elephant would that be? The fact that my sister is actively trying to sabotage whatever this is between us before it's even begun. His directness was refreshing, if a bit startling. "Ah, that elephant," I said, taking a sip of wine. "Yes, I'm aware. Your niece Margot works at my publishing house." His eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Margot? I had no idea you knew her." "Neither did I, until Monday, when she informed me that your sister called her in a panic about us having dinner." Robert's expression shifted from surprise to exasperation. "I'm sorry. Martha has always been intrusive about my personal life, especially since my divorce." "Why does it bother her so much that you might be interested in someone your own age?" I asked directly. "From what I gathered, she'd prefer you with someone younger." He sighed, running a hand through his already tousled hair. "Martha has very specific ideas about social status and appearances. In her world, successful men are supposed to date younger women because it reinforces their position in the hierarchy. When I show interest in women my own age, especially accomplished, independent women, it disrupts her worldview." "That seems exhausting," I commented, "maintaining that kind of facade." "It is," he agreed, "which is why I stopped playing along years ago." He leaned forward slightly, "But enough about my dysfunctional family dynamics. I want to hear more about this shift from caution to authenticity you mentioned." Over the next hour, as delicious food appeared and disappeared from our table, I found myself telling Robert about the wedding, Martha's whispered comment, and the cascade of realizations that had followed. He listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights without dominating the conversation. "So, in the space of 5 days, you've confronted ageism, challenged your boss, and agreed to dinner with a man whose sister openly disapproves of you," he summarized, his eyes warm with admiration. "I'm impressed. It sounds more dramatic than it feels," I admitted. "Most of the changes have been internal, just being more honest with myself and others. Those are the most significant changes," he pointed out. "The ones that happen inside us first." Our conversation flowed easily from personal philosophy to literature, politics, travel, and our respective careers. Robert spoke passionately about his research on contemporary American novelists and his efforts to diversify the English department's curriculum. I shared stories from my publishing career, the manuscripts that had moved me, the authors whose voices I'd helped shape, the changes I'd witnessed in the industry. "You genuinely love what you do," he observed. "I do," I confirmed. "Even after 23 years, though I'm starting to question how I've been doing it." "How so?" I considered the question carefully. "I've spent most of my career making other people comfortable, smoothing rough edges. finding diplomatic compromises, being the reasonable one in the room. It's made me successful, but I'm not sure it's made me effective. Not in the ways that matter most to me. Robert nodded, understanding. The difference between climbing the ladder and actually building something meaningful once you get there. Exactly, I said, struck by the precision of his metaphor. And at 52, I'm more interested in the building than the climbing. As we shared a dessert of honey-drenched baklava, Robert asked about Melissa. She's wonderful, I said, feeling the rush of maternal pride I never tried to suppress. Brilliant, kind, hard-working. She's a research scientist at a biotech firm, working on treatments for autoimmune diseases. You raised her alone after the divorce. She was already in college when Daniel and I split, I explained, but emotionally, yes. Daniel was preoccupied with his new relationship. Robert's expression darkened slightly. That must have been difficult. It was, I acknowledged. Not just the betrayal, but the replacement. There's something particularly painful about being exchanged for a newer model, as if your entire history together was just a placeholder until something better came along. I understand completely, he said quietly. My ex-wife left me for her personal trainer. 32, with AB. You could bounce quarters off. Made me question everything about our 15 years together. The shared experience of midlife rejection created an unexpected bond between us. There was no need to explain the complex emotions, the humiliation, self-doubt, and eventual recalibration of identity. He knew. How did you get past it? I asked. Therapy, he said honestly. Lots of it, and time. And eventually realizing that her choices reflected her issues, not my worth. He smiled ruefully. Though I did join a gym for the first time in my life, I went blonde for 6 months, I admitted with a laugh. Terrible mistake. I looked like I was trying way too hard, which of course I was. By the time we left the restaurant, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the streetlights. We walked slowly back to his car, our conversation now punctuated by comfortable silences. I had a wonderful time, Robert said as he drove me home. Would you like to do this again? Maybe Sunday. Brunch. I'd like that, I replied, appreciating his straightforward approach. No games, no artificial suspense about whether he'd call. At my building, he walked me to the door but didn't press for more than a goodnight kiss on the cheek, respectful, without being distant. As I rode the elevator up to my apartment, I reflected on the evening with a sense of cautious optimism. Robert was intelligent, kind, and genuinely interested in me as a person, not as an age category. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my boots and checked my phone. 3 texts from Caroline demanding details about the date. 1 from Melissa sharing more honeymoon photos. And surprisingly, an email from Margot Winters, timestamped 9:47 p.m. Rebecca, after our conversation on Monday, I revisited the Peterson manuscript with fresh eyes. You're right, it's objectively mediocre. I've prepared alternative acquisition recommendations that leverage his platform while maintaining our editorial standards. Would you be willing to review them before next week's meeting? Also, regardless of what my aunt may believe, my Uncle Robert is a grown man capable of making his own decisions. She doesn't speak for the entire Winters family. Regards, Margot. I stared at the screen, surprised by both the professional concession and the personal acknowledgement. Apparently, my shift toward authenticity was creating ripples beyond my own experience. As I got ready for bed, I thought about the strange synchronicity that had brought me into the orbit of the Winters family. Martha's casual cruelty at the wedding, Robert's unexpected interest, Margot's professional connection. It felt like the universe was presenting me with a series of tests, each one asking the same essential question. Who are you now, Rebecca Harrison? Not in relation to others, not as a mother, an ex-wife, a potential partner, or a senior editor, but as yourself. At 52, I was finally ready to find out. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee, watching snow fall gently outside my window. Chicago winters had always seemed endless to me, gray, cold stretches of endurance between the vibrant seasons. This morning, however, I found myself appreciating the quiet beauty of the snow-covered cityscape, the way the early morning light created blue shadows on white surfaces. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Still on for the faculty reception tonight? Fair warning, Martha will be there with Henry. Apparently my brother-in-law has business connections with our new department chair." I smiled at the screen. Wouldn't miss it. Should I wear protective gear or will a cocktail dress suffice? His response came quickly. Wear something fabulous. Nothing irritates Martha more than a confident woman over 50. In the 12 weeks since Melissa's wedding, Robert and I had settled into a relationship that felt both comfortable and exhilarating. We saw each other 2 or 3 times a week, dinners, concerts, movies, long walks along Lake Michigan. When the weather permitted, we'd introduced each other to friends, shared our favorite books, and gradually built the kind of connection that felt substantial rather than flashy. Martha's disapproval had evolved from overt interference to chilly civility. At Thanksgiving, when Robert had invited me to join the Winters family gathering, she'd greeted me with a tight smile and immediately assigned me to a seat at the far end of the table, away from her brother. By dessert, Robert had deliberately moved to sit beside me, making his priorities clear to everyone present. "She'll either adjust or she won't," he'd said afterward. "Either way, it's her problem, not ours." His refusal to engage with her manipulation was refreshing. After years with Daniel, who had avoided conflict at all costs, softened at the expense of my feelings, Robert's straightforward approach to family dynamics felt like a revelation. My work life had undergone equally significant changes. After the confrontation over the Peterson manuscript, Julian had watched me warily, clearly reassessing his understanding of his formerly compliant senior editor. The acquisition committee had eventually rejected Peterson's memoir in favor of a different project. Margot and I had jointly proposed a collection of essays by women over 40 that directly challenged cultural narratives about aging. The shift in my professional approach had initially unsettled my team, but over time, they'd adapted to my more direct communication style. Some even seemed to prefer it, particularly Zoe, who had blossomed under more straightforward feedback and clearer expectations. "You're still kind," she'd observed one afternoon as we reviewed a manuscript together. "You're just not. I don't know, double quotes apologetic." I'd suggested yes. "That's it exactly. You don't act like having opinions is something you need to be sorry for." Her perception had struck me. How long had I been unconsciously modeling that exact behavior, that women, particularly older women, should present their expertise apologetically to be acceptable? The coffee machine beeped, pulling me back to the present. I poured myself a cup and opened my laptop to check email. Melissa had sent photos from her latest research conference in Boston, where she'd presented findings from her lab's work. In one image, she stood confidently at a podium, gesturing toward a complex slide of data. My throat tightened with pride, not just for her professional accomplishments, but for the self-assured woman she'd become. "You look amazing, sweetheart. So proud of you," I texted back. Her response came moments later. "Thanks, Mom. Heading to the airport now. Can't wait to see you and Robert next weekend." Melissa and Robert had hit it off immediately when she'd returned from her honeymoon. His genuine interest in her research and his lack of condescension, treating her as an intellectual equal despite their age difference, had earned her approval. "He actually listens when I talk," she'd marveled after their first meeting. "Unlike Dad's girlfriend, who keeps asking if I've thought about freezing my eggs before it's too late." I smiled at the memory as I scrolled through the rest of my emails. One subject line caught my attention. "Women over 50, Perspectives Anthology Contract Offer." The message was from Margot, outlining terms for the book project we'd developed as an alternative to the Peterson memoir. What had begun as a professional compromise had evolved into something we both genuinely believed in, a collection of voices that challenged the invisibility I'd felt so acutely at Melissa's wedding. Surprisingly, Margot and I had developed a cautious professional friendship in recent months. Despite being a generation apart, we shared a similar drive and clarity of purpose. She'd never directly addressed her aunt's attitude toward me, but her consistent support in professional contexts spoke volumes. Martha has always been terrified of aging, she'd commented once over lunch. For women of her generation and social circle, turning 50 was essentially a death sentence for their identity. And for women of your generation, I'd asked. Margot had considered the question seriously. I think we have more options. But the pressure is still there, it's just more subtle. The same message wrapped in wellness and empowerment language. And you, are you afraid of turning 50? Ask me in 10 years, she'd replied with a rare smile. But I will say, watching you these past few months has been, educational. I closed my laptop and moved to the bedroom to dress for work, selecting a cobalt blue suit I'd recently purchased. My wardrobe had gradually evolved, not toward trendiness or an attempt at youth, but toward colors and styles that energized rather than camouflaged me. I'd stopped coloring my hair, allowing the silver strands at my temples to grow in naturally. The transition period was admittedly awkward, but there was something freeing about abandoning the endless cycle of root touch-ups and the accompanying anxiety about being found out as older than I appeared. Robert, to his credit, had noticed and complimented the change. It suits you, he'd said, touching the silver streaks gently. Distinguished and beautiful. My phone rang as I was applying lipstick. Caroline's name flashed on the screen. I just got the most interesting call from Martha Winters, she said without preamble when I answered. I paused, lipstick tube hovering. What did the dragon lady want? To invite me to lunch, if you can believe it. Apparently, she's reaching out to the women in Rebecca's life to build bridges. I nearly dropped the phone. You're joking. Dead serious. I told her I'd think about it. Caroline's voice held equal parts amusement and suspicion. What do you think she's up to? Reconnaissance, probably, I said, recovering from my surprise. Or some elaborate scheme to prove I'm not right for her precious brother. Or, Caroline suggested, she's realized Robert is serious about you and is trying to adapt. I considered this unlikely possibility. Martha doesn't strike me as the adapting type. People can surprise you, my sister pointed out. Look at you 3 months ago, you were practically invisible at Melissa's wedding. Now you're dating a hot professor, revolutionizing your workplace, and letting your gray grow in. Talk about transformation. Robert is not hot, I protested automatically. He's distinguished. Potato. The point is, you've changed, and people around you are responding to that change. Maybe even Martha. After we hung up, I stood looking at my reflection, considering Caroline's words. She was right about the transformation. The Rebecca who had been devastated by a whispered comment at a wedding reception had evolved into someone who moved through the world with greater confidence and authenticity. The change wasn't just in how others perceived me, but in how I perceived myself, as a woman whose value wasn't diminished by the passage of time, but deepened by it. Would Martha ever truly accept that perspective? I doubted it. Her identity was too invested in a hierarchy that placed youth and conventional beauty at the pinnacle of female worth. But perhaps she could learn to respect my place in her brother's life, if not the philosophy that underpinned it. As I gathered my things to leave for work, I noticed a small package on my entry table that had arrived yesterday, a birthday gift for my mother, who would turn 78 next week. Inside was a first edition of her favorite poet's collected works that I'd tracked down through a rare book dealer. The inscription I'd written included a quote from one of her poems. The best of me is still unfolding. I ran my fingers over the words, struck by their resonance with my own experience. At 52, despite society's narrative that a woman's story should be winding down by this age, mine felt like it was opening to new chapters, new possibilities. My phone buzzed with another text from Robert. Just had a thought. After the faculty reception, want to drive up to Michigan for the weekend? There's a literary festival in Saugatuck. I've been invited to speak at small cabin on the lake included in the honorarium. I smiled at the spontaneity of the suggestion, another gift of this phase of life, the freedom to make decisions based on desire rather than obligation. Yes, I texted back. Let's do it. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming the familiar landscape of my neighborhood. I stepped into it with purpose, no longer invisible, no longer apologetic. Moving forward into a life that felt increasingly my own.